The crystal champagne flute trembled in my mother's hand as she stood up at the head of the anniversary table, and I knew before she even opened her mouth that something was about to break inside me. 40 guests filled my parents' restored Victorian dining room in Charleston, all of them holding their drinks aloft, all of them smiling at what they thought was about to be a heartfelt toast for 35 years of marriage. My mother cleared her throat, looked directly at me across the candlelit table, and said in that sweet southern lilt she reserved for cameras and strangers, "Before we celebrate your father and me, I have an announcement. Our wonderful daughter has graciously agreed to cover the down payment on your brother's new house in Mount Pleasant. $300,000, isn't that just the most generous gift?" The room erupted into applause. My Aunt Patricia actually started crying. My Uncle Roger raised his glass higher and shouted, "Now that's what family looks like." My brother sat 2 seats down from me, smirking into his bourbon, not even pretending to be surprised. And my father, the man I had spent my entire childhood trying to please, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who had just closed a business deal he'd been working on for months. I had agreed to nothing. I felt every face turn toward me, expecting tears of generosity, expecting a gracious nod, expecting me to play the role I had played for 33 years. Instead, I set down my fork very slowly, picked up my own glass of Cabernet, and stood up. The applause faltered. Someone coughed. My mother's smile tightened at the corners. "Since we're making announcements tonight," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silver and china, "I'd like to make one of my own. This is the last meal I will ever eat in this house. And not a single dollar of mine will ever touch my brother's mortgage, his car, his lifestyle, or his future. Not now, not ever. Happy anniversary." I tapped my glass against my mother's untouched champagne, drained my wine in one long swallow, set the glass down hard enough to make the woman beside me flinch, and walked out of that dining room without looking back. I heard my father's chair scrape against the hardwood. I heard my mother gasp the words, "How dare you?" I heard my brother laugh, actually laugh, like he still didn't believe I was serious. He would believe me by morning. My name is Caroline Whitfield. I'm 33 years old, a senior litigation partner at a firm in downtown Charleston, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the family bank, the family fixer, the family scapegoat dressed up in the costume of the family success story. My parents introduced me at every cocktail party as our brilliant Caroline, but the brilliance was never really mine. It was a resource, the way oil is a resource, the way a vein of silver is a resource. Something to be extracted. My younger brother Wesley is 29. He has a degree in marketing from a school my parents bullied me into helping pay for after he lost his scholarship in his sophomore year for, in my mother's words, stress-related issues. The stress was cocaine. We don't say that in my family. We say a difficult semester. We say Wesley's been through a lot. We say everything except the truth. After college, Wesley started a craft brewery that lasted 8 months and cost $42,000 I will never see again. Then a CBD wellness brand that lasted 4 months and cost $60,000. Then a luxury vacation rental concept that never actually rented out a single property and cost me $90,000 in legal fees when one of his investors threatened to sue. Each time, my mother called me crying. Each time, my father told me Wesley was just finding himself. Each time, I wired the money because I was tired and because saying no felt like betraying something sacred I couldn't quite name. I drove home from the anniversary party with my hands locked at 10 and 2, the marsh wind coming through the cracked window, the lights of the Ravenel Bridge spreading across the water like something out of a postcard I no longer believed in. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. What I felt was something closer to recognition, the way you feel when you finally remember a word that's been on the tip of your tongue for hours. They had announced my generosity in front of 40 witnesses because they thought public pressure would lock me in. They thought the embarrassment of refusing would be greater than the embarrassment of paying. They had calculated me down to the dollar, and the calculation had been working since I was 17 years old. Not anymore. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Mount Pleasant, my phone had 31 missed calls and 47 text messages. I left them all unread. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. I logged into the secure document storage where I kept every financial record from the last decade because I'm an attorney and that's what attorneys do, even when we shouldn't have to. I started building a spreadsheet, not for them. For me. By 2 in the morning, I had a document 17 pages long. Wire transfers, cashier's checks, credit card payoffs, legal retainers, 3 separate bail postings, 2 emergency room bills from incidents nobody in my family ever talks about. The total at the bottom of that spreadsheet was $487,000. Almost $500,000 I had given my brother across 11 years, none of it ever returned, none of it ever even acknowledged with a thank you note. I stared at that number until it stopped meaning anything, and then I stared at it some more until it started meaning everything. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door at 6:30 before I had finished my first cup of coffee. She didn't ring the bell. She used the spare key I had given her 7 years ago for emergencies. She walked into my kitchen wearing the same pearls she'd worn to the party, her makeup smudged, her hair flattened on one side from sleeping on it. "You will fix this," she said. No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement that she had publicly committed $300,000 of my money without asking me. "You will call your brother today and tell him there was a misunderstanding. You will call your Aunt Patricia and apologize for the scene. And you will write the check for the down payment by Friday because the closing is next Wednesday and Wesley already signed the papers." I poured her a cup of coffee. I slid it across the counter. I sat down across from her and waited until she actually looked at me. "Wesley signed papers committing my money without my signature," I said quietly. "Tell me you understand what you just admitted." She blinked. Her hand tightened around the mug. "Don't be technical with me, Caroline. You know what we meant. We assumed you would do the right thing because you always do the right thing. Don't punish your brother because you want to make a point about your independence. I am not punishing my brother. I am declining to subsidize him. There is a difference, and you have spent 33 years pretending there isn't." She set the coffee down hard enough that some of it sloshed onto the marble. "You sound like a stranger right now. Where is my Caroline? Where is the daughter I raised?" "Sitting right in front of you," I said. For the first time in her life. She left without finishing the coffee. I watched her car back out of my driveway, and I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no relief. Just a clean, empty space where guilt used to live, and a quiet voice in the back of my head wondering what I would put in that space now. Wesley called me at 11 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 11:06 and again at 11:12. On the 4th call, I picked up. "Caroline, this isn't funny anymore," he said, and his voice had that particular pitch I had learned to recognize over the years, the pitch that meant he was scared but trying to sound annoyed. "I already told the realtor. I already told Sophia's parents. The closing is next week. You can't just back out of something this big." "I never agreed to it, Wesley. Mom announced something I never agreed to." "You always agree. Stop pretending this is different." "It is different. And you know it is, because you're the one who suggested to her that she announce it publicly. That was your idea, wasn't it?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I had my answer. He hung up without saying goodbye. I made myself a second cup of coffee and went for a long walk along the Battery, watching the cargo ships move slowly across the harbor, feeling the salt air on my face for what felt like the first time in years. The pressure campaign began in earnest by the end of that week. My Aunt Patricia called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. My Uncle Roger sent a long email about the importance of family unity in times of trial, as if a real estate transaction were a trial. My cousin Madeline, whom I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, suddenly remembered I existed and sent me a text message that ended with the phrase "blood is thicker than money." I screenshotted it and saved it in a folder on my desktop labeled, simply, "Evidence." My father stayed silent. That worried me more than any of the calls. On the following Tuesday, my parents hosted what they called a family discussion at their house. The invitation came through my aunt, who said it was just to clear the air, sweetheart, no pressure. I knew exactly what it was. I had defended enough clients to recognize an ambush when I saw one. I went anyway because I wanted them to see my face when I refused them in front of everyone. I wanted there to be no ambiguity. I wanted the story they would tell about me afterward to be impossible to distort because I would be the one who had told it first. There were 22 people in my parents' living room when I arrived. Not just immediate family, cousins I barely knew. My mother's bridge club. My father's golf partner from the country club, a retired judge named Harold whom I had met exactly twice in my life. They had imported witnesses. They were going to put me on trial in my own family, and they had stacked the jury. My father stood up when I walked in. He did not greet me. He gestured to a single empty chair in the middle of the room, the way you would direct a witness to the stand. "Caroline," he said in his courtroom voice, the voice that had once made me cry at the dinner table when I was 9 years old for failing to clear my plate, "your mother and I have called this family meeting because we are deeply concerned about the choices you have been making. We feel that you have lost sight of what truly matters. Family, loyalty, sacrifice." A murmur of approval went through the room. My mother dabbed at her eye with a napkin, even though I could see from across the room that her makeup was perfect and her eye was dry. "For your brother's entire life," my father continued, "you have been his role model and his protector. We did not raise you to abandon him at the moment he needs you most. We did not raise you to humiliate this family in front of our friends. We did not raise you to behave like some career-obsessed stranger who has forgotten where she came from." I sat in that chair and I let him talk. I let him build his case. I let my mother chime in with her tearful additions. I let my Aunt Patricia describe how worried she had been about Wesley ever since his stress problems started. I let my Uncle Roger remind everyone that the Whitfield family had always taken care of its own. I let the retired Judge Harold nod approvingly from the corner like he was about to issue a ruling. I sat there for almost 40 minutes, my hands folded in my lap, my expression neutral, listening to 22 people slowly construct a version of me that did not exist and never had. When my father finally finished, he asked me if I had anything to say for myself. I stood up. I walked to the center of the room, the way I had walked to the center of a courtroom hundreds of times in my career. I let my eyes move slowly around the circle of faces, settling on each one for just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "My brother," I said, "has cost me $487,000 over the last 11 years. I have receipts for every single transaction. I have signed promissory notes for 3 of those loans, all of which my brother has defaulted on, none of which he has made a single payment toward. I have email correspondence in which my mother explicitly acknowledges that those were loans, not gifts. I have text messages in which my brother promises to pay me back, dated as far back as 2019, with no payments ever made. I have brought copies of everything with me tonight. They are in my car. I would be happy to pass them around if anyone in this room would like to see them." The silence in that living room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "In addition," I continued, "I have recently learned that my brother forged my signature on a document presented to a real estate attorney last month, indicating that I had agreed to provide $300,000 toward the purchase of a property in Mount Pleasant. That is not a family disagreement. That is a felony in the state of South Carolina. I have not yet decided what I am going to do about that. But I want every person in this room to understand that the choice belongs to me, and that no amount of family pressure is going to remove the law from the equation." My mother made a small sound, like a cup being dropped on carpet. My father's face had gone the color of old paper. My brother was not in the room. I had noticed that the moment I walked in, he had not had the courage to be present for his own ambush. "I came here tonight," I said, "because I wanted you to hear this from me directly, with witnesses, so that there could be no confusion later about what was said. I am not going to provide the down payment. I am not going to provide any future financial support to my brother. I am not going to attend any further family events at which my finances are discussed without my consent. And if anyone in this room contacts me again to pressure me on this matter, I will treat it as harassment, document it accordingly, and respond through my attorney." Which, as some of you may recall, is also me. I walked out of that living room. Nobody followed me. The retired Judge Harold actually stood up as I passed his chair, the way you stand when a lawyer leaves the courtroom, and I will never know if he meant it as respect or as habit. I drove home with the windows down and Charleston spread out around me like a city I was finally seeing for the first time. 2 days later, I filed a formal request with the real estate attorney handling the Mount Pleasant transaction. I provided notarized copies of my actual signature alongside the forgery on the down payment commitment document. I included a sworn affidavit stating that I had at no point authorized the use of my name in connection with the transaction. The transaction collapsed by Friday afternoon. My brother lost his earnest money. His fiancée, Sophia, whom I had only met twice, called me in tears, asking why I was destroying their future. I told her, very gently, that I was not destroying anything. I was simply declining to participate in something I had never agreed to, and that if she wanted to know who had built her future on a forged signature, she should ask the man she was about to marry. She called off the engagement 2 weeks later. I felt nothing about that either. That was her choice to make, with her own information. My parents stopped calling after the 3rd week. I learned later, through a cousin who had become an unexpected ally, that my father had been advised by his own attorney that any further contact with me on financial matters could be construed as coercion, given the documented pattern. My mother, I was told, had taken to her bed for several days and then gradually reemerged into her social life with a new narrative. One in which I had developed some kind of mental break related to the pressures of my career. I let her have the narrative. I had no interest in correcting it. People who needed to know the truth already did. Wesley moved back into my parents' house. He did not get the house in Mount Pleasant. He did not get a new business. He did not get a new fiancé. He got, for the first time in his adult life, the consequences of his own choices served to him without a buffer, without a translator, without an older sister cutting his food into smaller pieces so he could swallow it. I have not spoken to him in 14 months. I do not know what he is doing now. I do not particularly want to know. My career got better. With nearly $500,000 no longer hemorrhaging out of my accounts every few years, I was finally able to invest in the things I had always told myself I would invest in someday. I bought a small property on Sullivan's Island, a cottage with a screened porch and a view of the dunes, and I spend long weekends there reading novels and walking on the beach and listening to a silence that does not require anything of me. I made full equity partner at my firm last spring. I started seeing a therapist who has helped me understand things about my childhood that I had spent decades refusing to look at directly. I started dating again, slowly, carefully, a man named Daniel who works as a marine biologist at the aquarium and who has, so far, never asked me for anything except my company. This past New Year's Eve, exactly 1 year after the anniversary party that ended my old life, I sat on the porch of the Sullivan's Island cottage by myself. Daniel was at a conference in San Diego. The marsh was very still. The sky was the color of dark bruised plum. I poured myself a glass of champagne, the good kind, the kind I used to feel guilty about buying for myself, and I held it up to the empty porch. To the people who told me my worth was measured in what I was willing to give away, I said quietly, to no one and to everyone, "You were wrong about me. You were wrong about love. And you were wrong about what family is supposed to mean." I drank the champagne. I watched the last light fade off the water. I went inside and locked the door behind me, and for the first time in my entire adult life, there was no one on the other side of any door I had closed who was waiting for me to open it again. The silence was mine now. I had earned it, and I was never giving it back.